High school sports have evolved thanks to Prepspin. Tonight, catch all the hard-hitting action live and in real time as the game happens in 1080p HD video. Join us tonight for the Mingy Beef Jerky High School Football Game of the Week with the legend, Gary Ball, Coach Mike Meehan, and the king of stream, William Warfield. Nobody does high school football like Prepspin does. The Mingy Beef Jerky High School Game of the Week comes your way now.
This is where it all started, right here on this farm. We may have grown over the years, but we've never lost sight of what was important to us. We're continuing that tradition today, and we always will be, for generations to come.
Well, good evening and welcome to Frederick Douglass High School. William Warfield here with you. It's the Prepspin podcast once again, Season 1, Episode 2, but this is a special episode here today because JD Sports Academy's very own founder and president, Mr. John Davis, is here with us. And John, it's so good to see you again. You know, I haven't seen you in, 5 years, I guess?
At least. Yeah, it's been a while, William.
Wow. So you've got a lot going on. I know you're starting your own podcast for the Good of the Game podcast. You're getting ready to launch that in early December.
Correct.
And you got a lot going on just business-wise, but you're still involved with all the youth football and just football all over the world, not just locally, but all over the world. Talk to us about that.
Well, it's kind of a neat deal. We've got a lot of irons in the fire right now. The podcast called For the Good of the Game is going to launch on Thursday, December 5th, and will be a bi-weekly video podcast. And then in between each of those episodes, we'll air different and distinct independent audio podcasts. So the For the Good of the Game started out as a byline, and it was so profound that I just had to go with it. We just finished a trip to Phoenix where I did 4 interviews with a group out there that has an existing podcast studio, and had some great interviews. And it was interesting. One of those guys, David Diaz-Infante, who I believe you know, or at least know of. Yeah,
I do.
He was the one. I was speaking to him on the phone one day, and I told him, the byline of the podcast is going to be For the Good of the Game. And he said, "Oh, JD, that's really cool. You ought to just make that the name of it." So I gave him credit for convincing me to do that. And he of course won 2 Super Bowl rings with the Denver Broncos, and he was one of the guys we were lucky enough to interview while I was out there. So we've got a lot going on. We're planning a trip to Japan in March to shoot a 3-part series of American football in Japan, which will be a blast. We're going out there with Michael Husted, the former Bucks kicker.
Right.
And he runs a specialist camp over there. So when you said international, that we're going to try and do other ones, but first step first, and that's going to be our first initial step.
I hear that there's kicking is quite the thing over in Japan. Kind of specializing in that.
Yeah, it really is. There's it's caught on there real big, and of course it has been huge, both place kicking and punting out of Australia for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And I ran a tryout camp in San Antonio about 3 years ago for a pro football league that was up and coming at that point, and we had 2 guys that flew from Australia specifically to try out for that team or that league.
Well, let's go back a little bit here, okay, because I met you for the first time. I believe it was a Kentucky All-Star game for Football University, right, that was going on here in Lexington. And you kind of got us into that whole Football University, national tournament. I guess word of mouth. You said, hey, these guys are streaming this game. You ought to check them out. Check. And next thing you know, we're down in San Antonio and enjoying that whole thing. So I still need to thank you for that, and I really do appreciate that, because that kind of was the first big thing I think that we did as a broadcast company, was to go down there and kind of do that. But you kind of scouted us out on that. So if anybody wants to know where some of the bigger things that we've done here on the network came from, John Davis is responsible for that.
Well, I appreciate that. It's good things come to people who deliver. That's and that's what you guys did, and what you continue to do as you've grown. So I'm just excited as heck to see the success that you guys have had, and real excited to not only be here tonight, but to be able to get reacquainted and kind of grow the relationship a little bit.
Absolutely. So you're starting this whole new podcast, and we mentioned that it starts in early December. What's your official start date for that?
We're going to launch. I'll have the YouTube channel is officially going to be up next week, and I'm going to put some intro and teaser videos out then, because I want to talk to people about the why. And I came prepared to talk to that a little bit tonight. In fact, it was interesting because when I was interviewing David last week, he said, JD, what's your why behind the podcast? And my involvement with youth sports started 20 plus years ago, and I saw it as a means for me to spend quality time with my own 4 kids while they grew up as I was in the Army active duty. Mm-hmm. And that grew into, not only football, but baseball as well. So to me, I want to be able to promote and the game of football and be able to educate. So we're using the acronym TIME, TIME, and we have some stuff, a little swag being made up. It's our time, it's your time, and that TIME acronym is for teach, inspire, mentor, and entertain. And we want to be able to reach out. There are about 4 really target audiences that I see, and that's parents of youth athletes, parents who are going to coach their youth athletes, existing coaches who may know the X's and O's but want to be able to expand their horizons in terms of the admin, game management, season management, things like that. And then because I'm a veteran, I want to try to reach out to the veteran community. There certainly are a number of football junkies within the veteran community.
Right.
Not necessarily just because you're a veteran you're going to listen to a podcast or like football, obviously, but and inspire in terms of what we want to do. Each of the podcasts will have its own theme based on the individual's experiences, but the thread throughout the entire series is going to be, as we finish up this year, the 100th season of the NFL, and go forward into the 101st, what we want to do is take a look forward at the state of football, both in the NFL and down in college, all the way to youth, and here in the States, prior to worrying about the international piece, as seen through the eyes and experiences of those guys who played in that first 100 years. The guys that I've got 45 guys that are former players and coaches who have agreed to do interviews for the podcast.
Wow.
And that's where we're starting. And those guys span about 37 years in age. So, we have quite a few, I haven't added it all up, but we've got probably, I want to say almost half of those guys have at least one Super Bowl ring. We're working through some of those to build relationships with a couple of Hall of Famers, hoping to get those guys on. But there's, it's just exciting from the standpoint to be able to share, and hopefully some of those stories would then inspire, transition over into mentor, even though it's not a one-on-one exchange. We feel like the podcast can show some mentorship to young kids and or parents, because guys share their experiences, both good and bad, and growing up within the game. And then obviously entertainment in terms of just the raw entertainment value. We're hoping to make it so relaxed that it's more just, like we are now, two guys just sitting here having a conversation.
Right.
And that's kind of the way it came across, and it was really fun for me when we were shooting the ones in Phoenix last week.
First off, thank you for your service, by the way.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, we're definitely in we're indebted to what you've done for us, and because of your service, we're able to, all your sacrifices and things like that, we're able to do podcasts and things like that. So, definitely indebted to you. So your podcast, you've got 45 guys lined up. I'm sure that you can pull in even more because you're here in Kentucky right now. I know you're talking about maybe doing the Phoenix thing, but you being in Kentucky, I know Kentucky's got the Kentucky Football Hall of Fame. Do you ever talk to any of those guys?
We haven't yet. I mean, I'd like to reach out and
Frank Minifield, I believe.
Yeah, and make those connections. There are a number of cities in the United States, most of them current NFL cities, that have fairly large populations of retired guys. We have several guys, obviously, that are in the local area that played locally at one of the colleges and or got drafted and played in the NFL. Some of those guys are back here now, and some aren't. But while we're here, we want to take advantage, and we're not limiting it to a specific area or city or any of that. For instance, one of the things I'd love to do to tie the football to the military veteran connection is I'm really working after the season's over to try and line up interviewing all of the service academy head coaches. I have a couple of connections through some guys that I worked for when I was on active duty, and that's one of the things that we're working towards. So, we're certainly going to take advantage of any relationships that we can help foster or bloom, while we're here. And then depending on when we actually transplant, if we go to Phoenix next year, go ahead and blow that out too. One of the things unique about Phoenix is that if you were to take all the retired players and coaches in Phoenix, Scottsdale area, you could probably put together 4 NFL staffs. I mean, there's just tons of them out there. Oh, I bet.
I know the weather's always great out there, so that's a big bonus. You and I talked about that a little bit before we went on today.
Absolutely.
Phoenix is definitely a hot spot, for you to grow a podcast. So that's got to be, that's got to be pretty cool that you're in an area where you really have unlimited potential.
Yeah, and it's, obviously it's a college town with Arizona State University there in Tempe. There are a number of even just guys on that staff, obviously. I mean, Herm Edwards is the head coach. I don't know Coach Edwards, but there's all kinds of potential. But the bigger thing is just all the resources that we would need are there. The guys that we worked with when we were out there have a pre-existing podcast. Actually, they have several pre-existing podcast studios. So, it kind of helps keep down the overhead cost and allows us to really give a more professional feel right off the bat. And, the reality is you can shoot a podcast with your phone.
Right.
It's not we're not trying to necessarily start off being sexy, but, the idea would be I want to present the best image we can. And we won't always be able to do, that kind of top-notch deal. But it went well when we were out there. I'm really excited about the way it looks.
Yeah, I know next time we have you on, we'll have a better camera angle because we're recording this for video too, by the way. But
that's all right. Nobody needs to see my ugly mug anyway.
We're kind of space limited here, but we had a couple other spots that we were going to try to get to, but it just didn't work out today. I had a lot going on, and then Douglas stepped forward and said, "Hey, why don't you just do it in our press box before the game?" So I thought, man, that works.
Cool.
Right around the corner from where we were going to be at. So the podcast is all ready to launch and everything. But talk to us a little bit more about how you got here. What are some of the steps that you took to get to this point where you're at right now in your life?
Well, it started literally in fact, I'm planning to write a book about it called Creating Margin. It started when I was on active duty, and I found so many parents that said, "Oh, I could never coach my own kids," and to me, that was just weird. I found that I wanted to do that because it gave me that opportunity for quality time with all of them. Well, as it turns out, my wife and I figured out over time, how to make that work with 4 kids. And our kids are all within a 6-year time gap, so it's not, they're close together. So it wasn't, sometimes we were able to have 2 on one team or something. But we worked out a system to where we would create margin within my work responsibilities for me to be able to coach and spend quality time. And we incorporated our family time into that. And it blossomed from there. So when I retired, I ran the NFL Junior Player Development Program when it was still in existence for Kentucky. I did that for 5 years, and then the program went away. They started Play 60, which is still exists now. And I got involved in football university in 2011. I actually resigned from government service. I was a civilian and went to work for them, and then left there after about 1.5 years and opened my own sports academy up in Erie, Pennsylvania. And we were training athletes. Our youngest athlete was 8, and our oldest were professional Arena League players that played for the Erie Explosion up there. Okay. And we had a good thing going for about 1.5 years, really tough market, and we just didn't think we could sustain it. So I shut it down and came back and got involved through Wes Chandler, the former San Diego Chargers wide receiver. He and I were talking one day, and he said, "Hey, are you interested in doing some ops work?" So they were putting a league together, and that league is still probably going to go. They're looking at starting up this spring. It's called Major League Football. So I was the director of tryout camps, and we ran about 24 camps all across the country and had guys coming from all over the place. And so all of that throughout my life in football, so to speak, has led me to the point I am now. And I started looking at, well, in retirement, I never planned on not working, but I wanted to be able to take what I had done with the game of football because of my passion for the game and turn it into something. And there's a platform here that I think is valuable because statistically, 70% of kids in the United States stop playing youth sports by age 13. Wow. And it's continued to degrade over the years, specifically probably within the last 10 years, even more because of the risk of injury from kids being bigger and faster, and of course the research in the movie coming out about concussions and the CTE issue. So what we want to do with this platform is not only teach, inspire, mentor, and entertain, but also to educate parents on both sides. We want them to know the risks, and we want them to know the benefits. Socialization, teaching responsibility, accountability, and things like that kids learn from the game of football and from many team sports. So all of that journey, as I've walked along this path, it's always taken me back to the game of football that I started when I was in 3rd grade, and it's been unique. I don't know that any of my experiences all the way up through and including 2 years of college football necessarily prepared me for anything in particular. It was just kind of the culmination of this road that I've been walking down and all the experiences along that road that got me to where I am. So I feel privileged and humbled to be able to present that and use it as a platform to teach both, the value of the game as well as educate, parents and kids, and hopefully share a lot of experiences through the eyes of these guys that will be beneficial for them.
Yeah, and as far as, moving around a lot too, John, you certainly been around to different areas. So, I mean, you got different insight that you can share with a lot of folks as well from maybe how they do things in Pennsylvania to how they do things in Phoenix to how they do things in Kentucky. So, I mean, you're really seeing different aspects of the game, of how it's taught differently in different places.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to me. Like, I grew up playing Texas high school football.
Yeah,
okay, so, football in Texas is number 2 behind Baptist on the religions list, So it's and I played back then, it was 4A, now it's 6A, similar to what we have here in Kentucky. Yeah. But everybody always used to brag about the hotbeds of football, high school football, boys, Texas and Florida, and everybody, well, the reality is, California's always been on the radar screen. Ohio and Pennsylvania are real big. And when you look around the landscape here, we've got some super quality football and athletes here in the state of Kentucky. And I don't think Kentucky's ever gotten a real fair shake when it comes to that. Yeah. In fact, the guys doing the national championship with FBU, I think, have brought a lot of light to the middle school ages and helped out grow some of these players organically and gotten them some exposure that's helped a lot of these guys as they've gone up through high school and then on up. So, yeah, it is. And it's, everywhere you go, I have a young nephew in a small town in Texas, and they played six-man football. And my son played high school ball here in Kentucky at a small Christian school, and they played eight-man football. Mm-hmm. And we used to have to travel to Tennessee to play most of our games because most, other than KCD, that elected to play us an eight-man, most people didn't want to do that. Now, we only had 20 kids on our team. But, again, it's a platform for those kids to learn. Uh-huh. It's just a little bit different style of football instead of having 11 guys on each side of the ball.
Texas definitely does it really big down there. You've seen some of those stadiums. You've been in some of those stadiums, played in some of those stadiums. So in Texas, everybody knows that football's the thing, right?
Right.
We've been down there several times. Like I mentioned San Antonio earlier. We've been all over the city. I think, they got this huge $55 million high school stadium down there.
Yeah, it's the district stadium, holds 30,000 people.
Yeah. So we were down there doing some of those games, and it's just amazing. You see some of those stadiums pop up in Georgia now too. Where Atlanta's got one that does a district stadium too. That's really nice.
Yeah, the game has definitely grown in pockets, and I think partly due to we see it a little bit here in the state of Kentucky. You've got private schools that have always been super competitive for whatever reason. I don't know, I'd get into the mechanics and the politics of that, but there are certain private schools, and that has begun with the advent of ESPN and ESPN Rise specifically. I think that what it did is it elevated a lot of programs that probably used to get regional attention, and now they've gotten national attention.
I think you hit the nail right on the head earlier when you start talking about the youth programs that are in place in Texas. They've always had it, I believe. You talked about them having it when you were growing up, right? So Kentucky's just now getting that over the last 15 years. Mm-hmm. So it's still fairly young here. But what I've noticed in our state of Kentucky, and it's probably like this popping up all over the country, is when you get like the Kentucky Middle School Football Association involved, and then you get your rec leagues that are involved that are connected to your high school teams, then you get better football. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that I agree. I think that in many places, the high school coaches have seen fit to reach down to their feeder schools and share their playbooks and philosophy and stuff so that kids begin to get into the system before they get to the school. And they understand, a little bit about what they're gonna be doing. Probably the biggest, and I differ from a lot of, in my case, former high school coach, but in the case of a lot of coaches, there is a trend that's been occurring more over the past decade now. When you listen to former pro athletes and a lot of Division I coaches, you hear a lot more people talking about they love to recruit kids that have played multiple sports.
Yeah.
Particularly football players that have wrestled, that have played basketball, that have run track, and those things that help develop different skill sets, different hand-eye coordination. Basketball obviously is great for guys that are receivers, particularly if they happen to be, tight ends. They learn leverage in wrestling. They get speed and quickness in track, and so. I do think that these programs growing up, as you were talking about, the middle school, the youth leagues, then middle school, then high school, is a good thing. I am not a proponent of specializing to where, and it's been probably bigger in baseball and basketball than anything,
And that's a big topic right now, too, is specializing and why not to do it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I just recently had a conversation with two different guys. One guy had played in the NFL and the other coached at Division I for a long period of time, and they were both in agreement that when they go out recruiting, that when they would come talk to a high school player, that player's stock would go up when they found out that he played multiple sports. In the case of a football player, particularly if he wrestled, because wrestling has such a really, even though it's mano-a-mano, it's if you're an offensive or defensive lineman and you're a wrestler, you understand leverage even better when you get to the point where you've got to expand your skill set. So I am a firm believer that varying the sports you play, playing multiple sports throughout the year, and even more so, taking a break in between each of those seasons to let your body recover, even if it's only a week or two, is very valuable for young people as they grow up, because the different sports develop different muscle mechanics, and you tend to develop as an all-around athlete better if you have that exposure. Doesn't mean you can't get it if you specialize, but a lot of times what I see with specialization is a lot of overzealous parents and athletes that begin to believe they're all that in a bag of chips, and then they end up burning out before they ever reach their goals.
And the joints wear out too. I mean, you see a lot of ACL is like the big thing right now. Especially in soccer, where kids play soccer year round. It's got to be hard on those joints.
Well, I think kids moving is good. And I don't care if you're in band or you run track or whatever sport. Not every kid was meant to play a sport, and I think extracurriculars are great, and they serve a purpose in the development, socialization as kids grow up. But for kids who are involved in athletics, regardless of what level of talent they have, I commend them for the fact that it's a healthy thing to do. It's good for their well-being. It sharpens your mind. For those that are in sports where they sweat, there's been more and more science done on it lately. When you sweat, you produce brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF, which is called miracle grow for the brain, and that makes you sweat harder and get smarter. So it's one of those things that I think as kids develop, I just see many more benefits, in my humble opinion, for kids that hope to go to the next level, be that high school or college, or have aspirations of playing pro ball in some sport. I just think that there is a greater degree of development and benefit overall in the long term if they play multiple sports.
We got some multiple sport athletes that be playing here tonight on this field. You're in for a treat if you do decide to stay around, but if you don't, you can still watch it on Prepspin.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I'm going to be here for a while.
I'd love to have you back at halftime as well tonight. Maybe talk with Coach Meehan a little bit. I think that'll be a good conversation too. But up to you. So Frederick Douglass here is where we're at. We're here in Lexington, Kentucky. I know Mr. Davis has got fans all over the world. That I'm not kidding, and when I say that. But you got a lot of connections, and we're honored to have you on this podcast here tonight. Not only to plug your podcast, but just because of your knowledge that you have about the game of football. What's some of your favorite stories that you like to tell?
Well, it's funny. I try to share. One of my things is that I really believe that, every kid deserves to have a rock star moment, 15 minutes of fame. I don't care if you're in the third grade or the 12th grade, whatever, And I was sharing a story with somebody the other day, and my wife was listening to me, and it actually brought her to tears because I was relaying when I had an experience when I was a sophomore, and I'm 60 years old, and I still remember, I came in before halftime and threw a touchdown pass to Danny Hudson, and we ended up beating our arch rival, and flash forward over 30 years, and I'm coaching my youngest son in his sophomore year, playing high school football down in Tennessee, and the game was, we were up by 4. They had the ball at the midfield, and there was 1 minute left in the game, a little less than a minute. And he anticipated a read correctly and jumped a route and got a pick 6, which ended up being the last play of the game and basically sealed the win. Yeah. And on the bus ride home, I went back to say congratulations to him, and I couldn't find him. And he was slumped down in his seat, and he had tears coming out of his eyes. And I thought, man, what happened? It ruined his day. Wow. And he looked up at me with this big tear-soaked grin and said, Dad, this is the greatest day of my life, and I think anyone that's had that kind of moment, whether it happened when you were 8 or 18 or 26 or whatever, I think it's cool for youth in particular if they can do that. I was talking to former Mr. Kentucky football, Kurt Barber, who graduated from Paducah Tillman in '87, actually several years ago, was actually back at his alma mater as the head coach for a season. And he played at USC and then with the Jets. And we were talking about some interesting experiences that had happened, comparing notes with, guys that played in the NFL and experiences that they had for various teams. And I relayed that when I was doing my interviews with a guy named Bill Lewis, who played 7 years in the league. He was a center. He's an All-American at Wisconsin. And his son he's one of only 5 families, 5 father-son combinations that have been All-Americans at Wisconsin. And his son now plays for the Jets. He was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens and then traded to the Jets. And it was interesting to me. I don't know if it's necessarily funny, but it was interesting, the approaches, as he talks about through his son's eyes, that the way they trained and practiced with the Ravens versus what they do at the Jets. Because you would think that when you get to that level of football, it's all there's like a floor, but it's very diverse in terms of the coaching staffs and philosophies as to what they bring to the game. So that's kind of cool.
So, what's your favorite NFL team, by the way?
Well, I'm a lifelong Cowboys fan.
Hey, amen.
Amen. It's been a tough decade or two to be a Cowboys fan, but we'll see if they can pick up the slack here this season. I'm not a hater of any team. I really appreciate great talent, and there's just so much. That's why I love high school ball so much, because it's with all the hundreds of thousands and millions of players out there that pursue high school football, and that's all they ever know. That's the cap on what they can do, either because of where they live, what their family situation is, or what their talent level is. I think this is the level where so much fun is had, so many life experiences and life skills are developed and had, that this is really where it is. I mean, anybody can sit and dream about playing at the highest level, and for those that make it, more power to them. But it's.
I think the game of football teaches you things that no other sport can, though, doesn't it?
I agree. I think that there's a certain amount of, it's really weird. Of course, he wouldn't get away with it now, but I can remember, my youth league coach one day called a practice on Saturday afternoon after we had lost a game and ran us, and all he kept yelling was, "Water's highly overrated. No water breaks. Water's highly overrated."
How hot was it that day?
It was in Birmingham, Alabama. It was more muggy than it was hot, but. Yes, I think that the experiences that you learn in terms of grit, determination, self-confidence, accountability, all of those allow kids who have a natural tendency to become leaders to kind of come out of their shell. And I always tell kids, and I teach, or tell parents and teach kids, not every leader's a rah-rah guy, or girl. You can exhibit all kinds of great leadership traits by being the first one there and the last one to leave, making sure you have all your equipment, setting the example, going 100% on every single thing that you do, And a lot of kids, they get the impression through the press or through what they see on social media or whatever, you've got to be the out front person. That's not necessarily true. There are many ways to exhibit leadership, and I think high school football in particular allows the game of football, but particularly high school football, allows kids to blossom and develop and grow into those roles. And some don't, but many do.
So here at Frederick Douglass, which is where we're at here tonight, Coach Landis has got this thing with his kids that, he was talking to them about, doing things the right way, right? So it came down to, do you return your buggy when you're at the store? Do you return your buggy back to the cart collection? And so these kids got on social media and they started recording themselves returning their carts to the cart collection. So that kind of took off here, but it's that same message, that don't. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. Don't half-ass do stuff. Do things the right way. Right.
Yeah. Lou Holtz very famously is quoted in several of his speeches and saying, "There's never a wrong time to do the right thing, and there's never a right time to do the wrong thing."
There you go.
And I think that he's got more of those little wisdom bites than you can shake a stick at. But I commend the coach. I think that's a cool way for guys to demonstrate, doing the right thing. That's great.
Yeah, I think what he puts out there on his social media is how you do one thing is how you do everything.
That's it.
So
that's it.
Yeah. John Davis here with us today on the Prepspin podcast. Man, we're young in our podcast too. We did some beta testing out last year, but it came down to timing. Not having enough time to do it. So sounds like you got a great plan lined up. You got 45 coaches willing to talk with you. Well, former players. You got a lot going on with that. You certainly got your history with the game of football and your experiences with the game of football. You're going to have a heck of a podcast, John.
Well, it's I appreciate that, and it's when you look at the landscape and all of the assets and opportunity we have, it's pretty humbling. I mean, it's the guys that have agreed to do podcasts. For a lot of folks who are 40s, 50s, maybe up to my age at 60. We'll probably remember a lot of these guys, but a lot of the guys who are coaches only were, unless they were an OC or DC at the NFL level, they don't get as much notoriety. Assistant coaches just aren't a household name most of the time. Now, the guys that were players and coached or just players tend to have a little more. We interviewed down in Atlanta. We interviewed Billy White Shoes Johnson, who was, obviously a premier, considered one of the top 5 return men in the history of the game. Was selected to the all NFL 75-year anniversary team, and the only Hall of Fame he's not in is Canton. I mean, he's in his high school and college Hall of Fame. He was just recently inducted into Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame.
And we should mention real quick too that he was the creator of the end zone celebration.
That's right. He is credited with being the first to celebrate back, which evolved into what they called the funky chicken back in the day.
That's right.
And he's a wonderful guy. We had the opportunity to talk to Dale Hellestray out in Phoenix. Dale played 17 years in the NFL, 10 of it or 11 of it with the Cowboys, and he was the long snapper during all 3 of their Super Bowl runs when they had the triplets, or as he pointed out to me, the quadruplets, because he was the 4th. So it is a blessing, and it drives me crazy from the standpoint that we have all this opportunity out there, and it's just lining it up and figuring out exactly how we want to eat the elephant one bite at a time and make it work, and hopefully make it entertaining.
What do you think football would be like now if those guys had social media back then?
That's a great question. We discussed that with one of the guys off camera. We didn't talk about it during the podcast, but I think that we would probably have seen the generational differences more so with guys that are in the 45 to 60 age range that played in the NFL, because it was kind of a different mindset than what you have today. The young guys now in the NFL have grown up with social media, at least from the college years, if not before. And they're used to all of that, which tends to create a lot more drama than they used to have back in the day.
Yeah.
So I think it would have been a little bit different approach, probably a little less drama, a little less baggage in some cases. I don't think social media is a bad thing. Most people use it effectively that have that platform of being a pro athlete. But there are certainly enough that don't, and those tend to get most of the press.
I know the college SIDs have their hands full with making sure that everybody's good on social media nowadays. Obviously some slip through the cracks every now and then, but those guys, they've got a little extra responsibility now trying to monitor all of that.
It's going to be interesting going forward. There's 2 things that I think will have long-term impacts, and one of them we just talked about. I think that the expansion and use of social media is going to be even more far-reaching than it is now, and I think that's going to invade the game. I mean, you've seen it in the XFL back when it was the first iteration of it. You saw it a little bit in some Arena League where, I think we'll end up with, helmet cams and all kinds of things to make the game more interactive for fans. The other thing that is not at the professional level, but it's going to have a huge impact, is the law that just got passed in California recently, House and Senate, and then the governor signed it. Where in 2023 now, athletes that attend universities in California will be able to be compensated for their name and likeness and so on. So essentially kind of a minor form of endorsement deals. And now the NCAA did a 180 flip and said, okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at this, because they anticipated more and more states approving the same type of thing.
I believe Florida's on board with that too now.
Well, and it doesn't. It'll mean one of 2 things in my mind. Either the NCAA is going to do a reversal and come up with a set of rules that will be acceptable, or they may very well go away. I mean, because I think there's been a lot of angst about the NCAA. I'm not with me personally, just, over the years, I've heard a lot of people gripe and complain about it. But it's a very interesting dynamic that a lot of people have talked about for many years, and having California lead the way was an interesting step forward in that process.
There was a young lady from Oregon, and it's a basketball player that we're talking about, but she had I believe it was number 20 jersey at Oregon Mighty Ducks, going there. And I can't think of her name right off the top of my head, but I saw this on social media the other day and got me thinking. It said, her jersey sells out, she'll never see a dime. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's a travesty. I can tell you that the body of the NCAA and the major schools, now there's a lot of disparity between Power 5 conferences and other schools, and between the major sports, like here in Kentucky, obviously, football to some degree, certainly basketball, versus other schools that their main sport is, fill in the blank. But the Power 5 conferences have the advantage. I mean, some of these schools bring in hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue because of the sports. Yeah. And some people argue, well, if you're a scholarship athlete, you're getting your school paid for. Well, the reality is, up until recently, with some adjustments that were made in the allowances, there were a lot of full-ride scholarship athletes that still didn't have enough to do everything they needed to in terms of, food and clothing on a daily basis and so on. Yes, their education was covered. And then when you get into the schools, Division II athletes, Division II schools rather, they're only allowed to have the major one, or Division I colleges can have 85 scholarship athletes. Division II, I think it's 37, or I can't. Don't quote me on that. But so there's all levels of disparity that would potentially cause or create chasms in the college football world, because the Power 5 conferences and the major guys are going to obviously have the biggest advantage under that.
And doesn't the NCAA, when you think about it for a second, they really do have to do something, because you're having some of these opportunities come up for youth, for kids that are going to go to college now. NBA, for example, the Development League, right? They're now offering to bring some of those high school stars in and pay them to play in the Development League, something that's happening now. So does that kind of give you the opportunity to skip college, or at least think about it pretty heavily? I know some of the high school kids, where they were pretty smart because they went across seas and earned a couple $100,000 and then skipped college. Now they're eligible to be drafted in the NBA. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I was having I started a Facebook private group with the same name as my podcast, and there's some really active guys in there. We've managed to generate. We've got about 420 plus people in there right now, and there's been some great dialogue and some great exchanges. And one of the things we talked about was, what is the effect of this new law and the NCAA's agreement to allow players to take compensation? There's another dynamic that a lot of people aren't talking about, and that's called the knowledge business. The knowledge business, as reported by Forbes earlier this year, is a $355 million a day business. And that's people that write books, do public speaking, write white papers, do podcasts, things like that. And a lot of kids now are opting to, a lot of people, but certainly a lot of college-age kids are opting to go find a mentor or an expert in a certain area that they want to pursue, and paying them to speed up the process. In other words, they're stepping around the college and saying, I'm going to go be X, so I'm going to find who does X well and pay them a lot of money and learn it and speed up the process. Now, what happens to the athlete? I mean, the evolution of this whole thing between the education piece and the athletics piece, you could end up with a college-level professional football league that very much resembles the D League in the NBA.
Get the Kentucky Wildcats down the road, eh?
But I mean, I think we're many, many years from that happening. Yeah. But I could see carrying through to a natural conclusion that potentially could, this whole impact of getting basically minor level endorsement deals could lead to where we have a college level pro league, if it were.
So if we trace it back, I mean, honestly, this whole thing really started back when Ed O'Bannon kind of sued the video game maker for using his likeness in the video. Do you remember that in the video game?
Yeah. Now they've taken they can't do that stuff anymore.
So they totally stopped making the college football games, but with this new stuff coming out, those games will be coming back, I'm sure.
I think it would be,
because these guys are going to get paid for it.
Yeah. And it was interesting. We were at a game up in Erie, and I had I had 3 former NFL players with me, and we went up in the press box just like you and I are right now.
Yeah.
And it was before the game, and one of the gentlemen that was broadcasting the game had his son with him, and his son, when we walked in and these 3 NFL guys former NFL players followed behind me, the kid's eyes got real big, and he says, "Dad, I used to play Madden with him," and we got a big kick out of that because the guy didn't even know his number was in, or his likeness was in Madden. So I think it'll come back because they'll be allowed to do so, and it's a very, very complicated business. It's a very slippery slope for athletes to get involved in, especially with the use of the transfer portal now. Guys, they're transferring just because they want to get playing time sooner. And you're having fewer guys in major colleges are becoming it's the instant gratification piece you see coming out in college athletics. Now that the means exists for a guy that says, well, you're going to have to sit here for 3 years and be a quarterback and maybe start when you're a senior. A lot of guys say, but to heck with that. I'll go to someplace else that recruited me where I can start sooner. And I think that's a disadvantage for them, although some of them have certainly made good with it, Let
me ask you this, getting back on the podcast topic. What's your belief on why it's blowing up so much right now?
One, because of accessibility and ease. I think that just about anybody with a cell phone and connectivity to the internet can do a podcast, whether it's live or taped. And I think that more and more people are fed up with mainstream TV, and they're consuming their content via the internet. And podcasts, whether they be, on a streaming service or on a YouTube channel or whatever, podcasts have become so popular. I mean, I don't know how many there are right now. I'm sure that there are
thousands,
probably
maybe millions,
hundreds or thousands, if not millions. Yeah. But it's never, interestingly enough, when I started doing my research and began digging down into it by keyword searches on Google, I really didn't find, I found a bunch of football podcasts, but I didn't find anybody that was doing what I'm going to do.
Oh, so, no, it's not out there yet.
So it's interesting to me that is, but I think it's the convenience, it's being fed up with mainstream TV, and it's the ability to basically, if you have an internet connection, stream content anywhere in the world, and more people are reaching out to do, whether they're listening to a podcast in the gym while they're working out or while they're driving, or whether they're watching a video podcast from the comfort of their home on their TV, over YouTube.
Yeah, it's an on-demand world right now too, so it's very convenient, like you said. So I was saying, I mean, it must have been 10 years ago when I started really, concentrating on doing this whole Prepspin thing, but everything back then seemed like to me that it was all going to an app anyway. And here's my thoughts on that. Your satellite companies, they'll never be able to compete with the cell phone companies because they can't deliver the bandwidth. And people are going to need that bandwidth to stay in touch with what they like, right? With what they want on demand. So everything's an app. Everything is going to be geared to specific people with likenesses, with whatever they like, that's out there. So everybody's got a choice. What's your thoughts?
I agree with you. I think that there are many people that are voting with their feet or voting with their cell phone, as the case may be. If you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk does a lot of stuff in the entrepreneurial space, very successful. A lot of people don't necessarily like him because he's kind of profane, but he doesn't apologize for it. And one of the things he talks about when he's giving his keynotes, he pulls his phone out and he says, this is where people's attention is now. If you are not connecting with them on this device, you're wrong. Whether it be streaming video on an audio, podcast, or video on YouTube or whatever. And I think that it all has to do with what you were talking about a minute ago. I think it's the convenience and it's the instant gratification. It's just like we've gotten used to Google. Well, Google bought out YouTube, and YouTube's the second largest search engine. So people come to those to either get an answer to a question or a solution to a problem. Yeah. And that has opened up the doors for a lot of monetization of specialists and other people that doing things that before you had to go find a shop somewhere.
Yeah, I was looking the other day on YouTube. You mentioned searching on there, but I was looking on there. I couldn't figure out how to. We had, I guess, hair or something in the drain of the bathtub, right? I couldn't get that drain plug out. It was screwed on a certain way, and I went directly to YouTube and figured out how to do it. So there's a certain way that you had to do it to get into a track, to be able to drain it. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there right now that you can check out, but how do people find you? That's the thing. How do you put yourself out there so people can? How do you promote yourself?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to a marketer the other day, and he said, whatever you do when you start your podcast, don't waste money trying to market it. He said that's like walking up to a cliff on the Pacific Ocean with a needle dropper full of water and squirting it out and go, hey, watch my ripple. You're nobody's going to see it. You've got to grow it organically. I mean, obviously, you've got a 10-year head start on people because people know your name, your company, the product, the excellence that you guys put out.
That man behind you right there, that's Gary Ball, by the way. Gary Ball, the best play-by-play guy in the state.
Awesome.
He's grown it organically, I think.
And I think that's what you got to do, because in today's day and age, unless you have literally thousands or millions of dollars to spend on marketing, in most cases it's going to go by the wayside. So for small people and like me, I mean,
we're totally small. Everybody thinks we're this big corporation, but we're not. We're still spending house money, John.
Well, it's
totally.
When you're in the position that we are, you're not so much you, because you've got to start in a good foothold in this region. But for me, it's you've really got to grow it organically and depend on folks that decide to subscribe and decide to tune in to be able to help spread the word. Because the reality is, you can spend all the marketing dollars you want, and you're not necessarily going to get people on board any other way other than direct reference, some kind of referral or sharing or something like that. So that's what we hope to do. I mean, ideally, I'd love it if our Facebook group morphed into subscribers right away, but that may not happen. The likelihood is not very high. But, I'm patient. I'm willing to, start out small and just try and grow. So to answer your question, I think you've got to be persistent, and you've got to be able to stay in the market, keep putting out, and you got to deliver. You got to be able to put good content out there, because, the quality of the content is solid. It needs to be good, but it's more the content itself, what it is versus whether or not your audio is perfect or your video is perfect or whatever. I think that from what I've learned doing my research is if you put out great content, people will eventually begin to come around and watch your stuff.
So speaking of organically, what we've noticed here lately, and I speak of Prepspin on a local level that could be a national level one day, as we decide to grow. But if you watch the football game tonight, you'll notice people with their phones in the crowd, and they're watching the replays on their phone. That's a great feeling, by the way.
Absolutely, especially when, this is a gorgeous stadium. It's beautiful. Certainly the field itself is beautiful, and the surrounding area is beautiful. But not every high school, in fact, very few high schools have the kind of money to be able to throw, a multi-million-dollar jumbotron up in an end zone so that they can run, replays. So being able to provide that service is awesome. That's a great way to reach out and begin to grow your reach.
Yeah, it's definitely a little niche, I think, that we've got going on here, but we're avidly involved with the local fan base. And that's a beautiful thing that, you start here and then everybody starts to catch on. And your quality, I think, speaks for itself. So what you've got coming out, your quality of your guests that you got coming on, which is phenomenal. I mean, like you said, nobody's doing this right now. They'll follow in your footsteps, John, but what you got going on is something special coming out.
Well, I hope so. I mean, every interview is going to be a little bit different, and hopefully, there'll be some. Again, I think it's a fairly small audience to begin with, but I do have. I mean, when you look around any major stadium, whether it's college or the NFL nowadays, and football junkies are prevalent all over the country. Yeah. And I think it's just kind of growing it organically, and hopefully it'll catch on enough that people will, whether it's their guy that played in college and went to the NFL, or somebody they've never heard of, or something unique that happens, that we can bring to light and discuss not only the hot button issues like the contact, CTE, concussions, things like that, but also the goodness of the game and all that kind of thing. So hopefully the platform will grow. I'm excited about it. I certainly, I mean, I'm going to have fun with it regardless.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not doing it for any other than my own enjoyment and entertainment, because it gives me an opportunity to see old friends and sit around and talk football, and those are things I love to do.
Yeah, that's how a lot of the successful things start out. Is again, it comes down to number one, are you having fun with it, and number two, can you translate that to people having fun listening to your conversations? So I think that's definitely something that you got. I've had a lot of fun here tonight, by the way.
I have too, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say one of the things we hope to do is the podcast is going to be kind of a platform. I'm going to do workshops for parents and coaches. We're going to do masterminds with some of the NFL guys. We're going to do digital video training series where we're going to have guys actually do 25 to 40 minute videos that kids can purchase, and as long as they have connectivity to the internet and a mobile device, they can pull it up and look at it. And then lastly, we're going to do a mentorship program, and this is all 2-3 years from now.
Sure.
But we've got an app that's already been developed that is going to allow them to be able to do a personal mentorship program. So if you're an NFL player and I'm a high school player, in my off season, I could get personally mentored during my off season training and have one-on-one through the app, and accountability and training programs and conversations and things like that I think will lend a lot of value. So the podcast is going to kind of serve as the foundation for all those efforts over the next few years as we move forward.
Yeah, and where can people get a hold of you right now?
Right now, it's we actually, believe it or not, I was lucky enough when I was doing the planning, I actually did secure the domain name For the Good of the Game. Blew me away.
Oh, wow.
So we are going to, even though I have a company, JD Sports Academy, and we do have a site that's under construction, we're going to actually launch the podcast website, which will be forthegoodofthegame.com. Right now, if anybody wants to shoot me an email, I'm still using my Gmail for right now, and that's pretty much out there all over the place. It's Coach D59, COACHD59 at gmail.com. And I welcome if people have questions or comments or suggestions. Every bit of feedback is good feedback.
Sure.
when you're on this trip. So we're excited about it. But it'll be forthegoodofthegame.com. That'll be the website, and it'll eventually be the all the social media as well.
All right. We got about 3 minutes left, so we'll go into a 2-minute warning. So anything that you want to talk about, let's talk about it.
No, I'm good. I'm excited I'm excited to see the game here tonight. I was doing a little bit of the research, like I told you before we went on mic. I don't get to see a lot of Central Kentucky football, and I was looking at the success that the two teams have had, Scott County and Frederick Douglass, both just an immense amount of success, not only with their records but also statistically. So I'm excited to see it tonight. I mean, you got some talented athletes out there. I kind of highlighted the receivers on the side of the quarterbacks, or the receiver and quarterback on the side of Scott County, and then the quarterback and running backs on the Frederick Douglass side. But this is going to be interesting from not only the history recently, as you were explaining to me, that they split last year, and unfortunately it went Scott County's way in the playoffs. So we'll have to see if they can try to regain that prowess tonight.
Yes, so Scott County, Frederick Douglass, we got it coming up next here on Prepspin.com. Gary Ball, Coach Mike Meehan will be on the call tonight. I'll be producing the game here, and Joe Allen will be on camera tonight. He's the best camera guy in the state. I think I told you that earlier.
Absolutely.
I always brag on Joe. So we got this tonight. Next week we'll have live audio broadcasts for the next 2 weeks, and then state championships we'll have at Kroger Field. We'll be doing the production for that, video production for that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, so 6 state championships will be handed out December 7th, 8th, and 9th. So it's big time for us. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's once again, congratulations on the growth and success that you've had. Sometimes it's the smallest little things that happen that that seed hits the right ground and it grows, and you've taken full advantage of that and really blown this thing up. And I'm super proud to be on here and humbled to be on here tonight. And it was a big thrill for me to see where you've come, over the last 10 years or so. So congratulations.
I appreciate that, John, and congratulations on you doing your podcast and all the things that you've done. I've always looked up to you, by the way. I don't know if you know that or not, but I always, pay attention to you on Facebook and try to keep in touch with you that way. And I know there's some things that you and I may be working on in the future with some technology type of stuff, but what you're doing and what you're setting out to do, and just everything that you've done, man, has been phenomenal.
I appreciate it. That's very, very humbling.
All right, so again, John Davis for the good of the game, JD Sports Academy. Man, it was awesome to have John Davis on tonight, and we'll have the Frederick Douglass Scott County game coming up next on Prepspin. Gary Ball, Coach Mike Meehan on the play call, and again, we're here at Frederick Douglass High School. It's the KHSA State Playoffs, Class 5A tonight. Thanks, John Davis. That was awesome, man. That's a good hour talk.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It went by fast.
Yes, sir.
Good stuff.
John. Oh yeah, John Davis, Gary Ball.
Very nice to meet you.
This is the fella I really want you to meet.
Get my fake kids working.
Coach Mike Meehan.
Yes, sir.
You and this guy need to talk.
How you doing?
John Davis. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Your roots will run deep with each other. I promise.
Is that right? You from Pittsburgh?
No, I was there about
You
2
live in
months ago.
Pennsylvania,
But,
though.
Oh, okay.
I started sports academy up in Erie, and I think I was in Pittsburgh about 2.5 months ago doing some training as executive coaching. So it's the first time I ever been in the city. Actually.
Nice city. I like to listen. That was a real